God, it's a giant. This is a giant. Oh, come on, stay on. It's gonna jump.
You want to know the coolest thing about Kristine Fischer? It's that she still goes crazy every time she hooks into a big bass.
This is a freaking giant. Come on. Oh. Get in there. Oh my God. Are you freaking kidding me?
Today, Fischer is the face of professional kayak angling and one of the few women to have ever won a major co-ed bass fishing tournament. But a decade ago, she was just a musky bum, living in Nebraska, working 2 or 3 jobs at a time to make ends meet and fuel her fishing obsession.
Literally put every single thing I had into fishing these tournaments and being successful out on the water to where like it was almost excessive. You know, I'd get up earlier than everybody, I'd stay out later than everybody, and I'd just fish and fish hard, and a lot of other areas of my life kind of suffered those first 2 years.
That's why I think she loses it when the bass are biting. It's a stark reminder that this is her life now. She's made it.
In terms of making a transition and making a full-time living and making a decent living fishing, it's still, I sit back sometimes and put my feet up. I'm like, my goodness, I did it.
The other cool thing about Fischer is she's so accessible. She records her fishing exploits on Instagram and YouTube, shining a bright spotlight on kayak fishing, which is seeing its own rise in popularity these days.
I don't look at myself as being this big figure in the sport. I just don't, and I probably never will.
I'm senior editor Joe Genzel, and I recently had the chance to catch up with Fischer and some of her buddies to find out how she got her start in tournament fishing, why she stuck with it, and where she thinks the sport of pro kayak angling is headed.
Did you hear that? Someone just smoked it right at the bow. I'm gonna throw chatterbait.
How's your season off to?
Honestly, it's been going really, really well. I've cashed, I think, 6 or 7 checks now. And usually for me, my strengths really kind of start to shine in the summer and fall. And the spring, sometimes I haven't been as consistent. I've been super consistent this spring. So it's been my best start to the year I've ever had.
Is that like something that you tried to focus on, or is it just an aberration, or you think it's just like more experience, or what's going on, you think?
Probably a little bit of both. I mean, the spring, it's definitely probably a confidence thing. You know, I know going in, it's pretty hit or miss for me in the spring, and I haven't had a lot of experience fishing early spring in some of these bodies of water. So now I'm getting there. I'm getting to the point where I'm getting more experience doing that. I don't know what it is, but this year's been going really, really well. And
now how many years are you into being a pro angler?
Well, it's my 5th year, fishing full time.
Like you were born in Nebraska, right?
I was, yeah. Very, very small town, Weeping Water, town of like 800 people in the southeastern corner, very rural. Born and raised there, but I was lucky, very fortunate to be brought into a family that was very outdoors oriented and also had an affinity for travel. A lot of my upbringing revolved around piling into our old van with shaggy carpet on the walls. We had one of those conversion vans, and we would drive up to Minnesota, to the Boundary Waters, up into Canada, North Dakota, South Dakota, and various places in Nebraska, Colorado, and we just went and fished and camped all over the place. That was a huge part, and probably what fostered my love for the outdoors is being a part of the family that I'm fortunate enough to be a part of. I think a lot of people are by now are pretty familiar with the fact that I grew up without television and video games. So my brother and I quite literally had the outdoors to kind of, appease us and satisfy our creativity. And we were both, we did. We played outside all the time and fished and went down and creeked and played in the woods. And, it's kind of how we were brought up. We fished family walleye tournaments, and my mom's more passionate about it probably sometimes than my dad.
Growing up in Nebraska, I guess it's not thought of as a bass mecca, but like all those trips, did that kind of foster your drive to fish?
Definitely. I always loved to fish, but I didn't really do much bass fishing aside from your typical farm pond bass fishing, running lakes and throwing little poppers around and stuff. I was more of a pike and muskie were my big things. My entire childhood and into my teens and even early college years, that was my main focus. I didn't really start focusing on bass fishing until I started competing. I didn't grow up with a flipping stick in my hand. I was checking baits for pike and muskie.
So I guess what kind of influence do you think having growing up catching muskie and pike has on you now?
It made me I had an adventurous heart, and I was really enthralled by big fish, and trophy fish, as we all know, behave differently. And so I think that my patience and my desire to catch giant pike and giant muskie, did kind of transfer into the bass fishing world. And it takes different approaches to catch a trophy fish of any species. Mm-hmm. And not only that, it really helped my casting, I think, because I remember as a kid, my brother and I would literally take daredevil spoons, and from the boat, my dad would take us around the islands. We would try to place our spoon in these in every little crevice of the rock faces there. And I would literally launch a spoon and try to put it, in a 3-inch wide gap in the rock. And my brother would too, and we would cast until we couldn't feel our arms anymore. So I think it definitely helped me with my accuracy and be a decent caster, and just having a decent, well-rounded knowledge of what it takes to be an angler and what to pay attention to and what you're looking for.
And so and where did you end up going to college?
I had a scholarship and a full ride to go play at a junior college in Kansas. I did that for 6 months, played volleyball there. I had both an academic and an athletic scholarship. So I did that for 6 months, honestly kind of struggled in college. I really didn't like it very much. I got really bored. I didn't like being in class, and I didn't like the college sport part of having a practice every single morning and every single night and having tournaments every weekend. I felt like I couldn't get away and travel and do what I wanted to do. Basically, and this is terrible, I recognize this is a huge fault of mine, but I did the bare minimum to get a decent grade, and that was it. Mm-hmm. Which in turn, I didn't retain anything ever, but I did what I needed to, and my bare minimum was enough to get decent grades and just get by. I usually held down 2 or 3 jobs at a time and would do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I'd get out of town and go camping or on a trip or whatever for the weekend. I'd get back Sunday evening, and then I'd sit down on my computer and literally cram everything and do my entire assignment in the last couple hours until midnight and got it on time. That was every single week for me.
So you bartended? What other kind of jobs did you have?
I mostly did the restaurant scene. So I did that for exclusively for about the first 4 or 5 years. And that was simply because I figured out that I could make a ton of money with just a few hours a week. And I maintained a bartending / waitressing job throughout the next decade on the side while I worked at Shields. That was a huge step towards what I'm doing now. I worked up in the hunting and fishing department and as a boat tech and sold hunting, fishing, camping, all that outdoor stuff. I was the only female in hard lines up there. Did that for 5 years. While I was doing that, I also guided kayak fishing trips for Marty Hughes, who's one of the guys that got me into kayak fishing around here. I did a lot of guide trips for him and got paid for that. And I also then started teaching Pilates, which is a really funny story because, again, I didn't know, I was not an exercise person. And certainly not, I didn't know what Pilates was, but I was working at Shields and I was like, man, I'm getting really tired of punching. I love what I do. I love all the guys I work with, and I love selling in this industry that I love, but I'm getting tired of punching a time clock. I'm not wired for this corporate life. I got to do something. He's like, well, my wife owns a Pilates studio. She's looking for an instructor. You set your own schedule and you make really good money. And I was like, well, what the heck is, I don't know what Pilates is, but I'll call her. And ended up being really good at teaching Pilates. And I loved that job. Still don't really care much about Pilates, but I loved my clients, loved helping people, helping them get over injuries and feel better and have better posture and all these things, and made good money doing that. And, but again, it wasn't my passion, but it allowed me to start fishing tournaments. And I could take all my clients Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday if I work really long days. And because my clients come once or twice a week. So as long as I could work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I had the entire rest of the week off. And I go start fishing tournaments all over the country. What
made you decide to start doing that?
Fishing tournaments? Well, I was working on a customer's bow and up at the archery shop at Shields. I think I was 25. oh my gosh. So I was mid-20s, and a customer brought in a flyer for a local kayak fishing tournament. And before that, I had kayak fished quite a bit, but nothing serious. I mean, like I would take some clients' kayaks out and do some fishing, you know, just totally wreck fishing. I had no idea that like there were competitive kayak tournaments. I mean, absolutely no idea. Mm-hmm. And this flyer came in. It was at Wanahoo, which is a lake about 40 minutes away from Lincoln. And I was like, man, that sounds really, really cool. So I started looking at used fishing kayaks online, and I found one in Grand Island. It was a used Jackson Cuda, which actually was Marty Hughes' old kayak. I didn't know who he was at the time. And I ended up buying it on a whim, which is, you know, pretty much per usual for me. And I entered that tournament. There's like 45 guys there, and I didn't know anybody. I mean, I didn't know a single person. They all knew each other. And I remember trying to act, you know, I had such a chip on my shoulder going into these situations because I always felt like I had to just prove myself since I'd been in male-dominated everythings for most of my life. And I remember some of the guys asking me if they could help me take my kayak off the roof of my vehicle, and I was like, nah, I got it. And it was such a struggle for me. But, you know, I wanted to do everything by myself and show that I could do it. And I took third place. I kind of fell in love with it and got to know some of the guys. Marty took me under his wing and got me kind of involved in more of the local club stuff. And that's kind of how it went from there.
Kristine is a sponge when it comes to the outdoors, fishing and kayak fishing.
This is Marty Hughes, a guide and one of the founders of the first Midwest kayak fishing trails.
Right away, I could tell, you know, she was deeply passionate about being in the kayak and fishing. And one time I was out fishing with her, and she wanted to learn the finesse, because I'm a finesse fisherman mainly, and she wanted to learn a finesse technique. And she just would be so patient. And I remember I gave her a finesse worm to work with, and she was just so patient, and she perfected it, and she started catching bass with it, you know. And, you know, that was just one of the feathers in her hat, so to speak, of fishing, is that, you know, she enjoys, I know, power fishing, so to speak, but to see her, you know, just take that and run with it.
When I fished that first tournament, that was in the fall, and I ended up doing almost all of my local club stuff that entire next year. And that ended up qualifying me. I did fairly well in my local club stuff that next year, and that qualified me for a big tournament at Lake Fork. Well, they take a bunch of grassroots clubs, take their top 3 or 4 anglers, and you all go to Lake Fork. And so I went, that was my first time fishing what I would consider like a big tournament, national level tournament. And I went down there and fished that and did absolutely awful. It was very humbling and very eye-opening because I was actually out there, because I was doing pretty good back home. And, you know, I got down there and thought, you know, this is going to be fairly easy. You know, it wasn't at all. And that was a great experience for me, just getting my teeth kicked in. And I thought I was going to quit fishing. I was so discouraged.
So, I mean, I've seen her when she hasn't done well, and she's, you know, she doesn't take that very well, which I think she's probably learned, just like I have, that's just part of the game, you know. And but the success will come your way with the persistence and grit and resilience that she has.
I was so discouraged after that, but I went and one of the guys started kind of more of a Midwest series that was kind of a regional deal. It wasn't a national level series, but it was like we'd go to Wisconsin, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska type of deal. Mm-hmm. And I started competing in that. That's when I started qualifying for all the big stuff. I stopped fishing as much locally and started, you know, taking more and more time off of teaching. I was teaching Pilates just exclusively at that time. It was getting to a point where I was like, okay, I need to kind of make a decision here, where I had to quit my job entirely. And it was scary for me because I was very comfortable. I was very secure. I absolutely loved what I did. It brought me a lot of fulfillment and joy, but we ended up going off the road full time. I rented my house out, basically sold all of my furniture and all my belongings except a year, and went on the road 5 years ago now, when I first went on the road. But it was very difficult because I had a lot of growing to do as both a person and an angler, in the regard that I didn't realize how leaving everything would kind of impact me, and feeling I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Like, how am I going to find purpose by just fishing these tournaments? You know, how is that? And for me, like, my life has always been so driven by by having a purpose and doing something to better somebody else or something in this world. And I was doing that in my previous careers, and I didn't feel like I was going to be able to do that. And it was very hard for me. And not only that, but I also felt like early on, social media had just kind of emerged with like the angling scene 5 years ago when I first kind of got onto the scene with social media. And I saw how women were being portrayed, and there's a lot of the bikini stuff going on, and that kind of upset me a lot. And I felt like I am going to get no respect. People, this is going to be like all over again. I'm going to have to fight so hard to prove myself. And I was working so hard, and I literally put every single thing I had into fishing these tournaments and being successful out on the water, to where like it was almost excessive. I'd get up earlier than everybody. I'd stay out later than everybody, and I'd just fish and fish hard. And a lot of other areas of my life kind of suffered those first 2 years.
I've seen people that are driven, but in sports and so forth that I've coached, but I've in her, she eats, sleeps, and drinks it. And to be that successful takes a lot of time. And she's probably, she spends a lot of time on the road, and probably a lot of time, in remote places, but doing that. But at the same time, we're all envious of that, and the fact that everybody wants to have a piece of that life, I just know she has what I would call the it factor in quotations. The it factor is that, she is competitively driven to do well in whatever she does. If she were a doctor, she would be one of the best doctors out there. If she was a lawyer, she'd be one of the best lawyers. But, she's chosen this endeavor in the outdoors, and she's the best at it.
Can you explain like how difficult it is to decide, well, I'm just going to sell all my stuff, rent my home, and go try and make a living being a kayak angler?
Yeah, I think from when most people think of that scenario, it terrifies them, right? They're like, that's not even an option. But because of how I was quite literally about the most fly by the seat of your pants type of person my entire life. I mean, I went to Banff, Canada for 2 days and didn't tell anybody, and just came home, and I didn't even think about stuff like that. I decided, hey, I want to go to Canada. I'm going to go try to see if I can rent a car or do whatever. And that was very normal for me. So I think because I was just made like that, it wasn't as difficult as it could have been, but it still had its challenges. Even though I'm a person that doesn't have any really real type of routine, I kind of did in a way. Like I get up in the morning really, really early and go fishing for a couple hours and, have some quiet time, make myself a freaking badass breakfast, and then go to work for a few hours and then get off of work. And I had a gym that I went to sometimes. I had a church that I really loved. And my family was right there. And like I said, I saw my clients every day, and I kind of knew my little neighborhood, and I had a garden. And I didn't realize how I had kind of planted some metaphorical roots there. Someone that didn't really see herself ever doing that. And as soon as I uprooted all of that and got on the road, I kind of realized like, oh my gosh, like this is actually what chaos looks like my everyday life now. I've always been that type of person that even though I made good money and I had, I was pretty secure, it wasn't difficult for me to let all of that go, because I'm a survivor. Like I knew that no matter what, eventually, no matter how many times I get knocked back down or I'd fail, I get back up and I figure out some unconventional way to make this lifestyle work for me. But the transition was a little bit more difficult than I had anticipated.
What were some of your early trials on the road, on your own?
Well, I guess the biggest thing for me is how am I going to make money, right? How am I supposed to make a living? I've always provided for myself, always. I mean, since I was, 16, I was paying for a lot of stuff for myself. It's weird. I'm not able to not be doing something that I feel like is contributing. And I'm sitting there, and granted, now it's so easy for people to make a living. There's so many remote jobs, but 6 years ago, there really wasn't. 5-6 years ago, that wasn't the landscape has changed a ton. And so I'm sitting there just stressing and trying to figure out what am I supposed to do. And that was one of my biggest challenges. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And that's when I started doing a lot of freelance writing. I was picking up every single writing gig I could possibly get my hands on. Mm-hmm. That was one thing that I was able to do to kind of stay alive during that time while I was trying to fish and figure out. I'm not sure I even realized it was possible to have a career in fishing, or I didn't know what my future looked like. I had absolutely no idea. And if we label success as someone that has a really good job, well, what do I tell people what I'm doing? I'm just fishing, I'm just fishing, traveling the country fishing, and I always kind of wondered, is that going to bother me one day if I feel like, what am I going to tell people? Where's my life going right now? Am I going to just be this musky bum living down by the river in a van who's barely, making this work?
We'll be right back. So can you kind of talk about I guess how competitive you are, and do you think always being just male dominated settings, did that drive a lot of that, or did it come from some other place?
I'm just competitive by nature. I guess I always have been, even as a kid. Some parents let you win. That was not the case with my dad, and it drove me nuts. It was kind of that tough, not that tough love, but that, I'm not going to take it easy on you. You're going to have to get better. And he would always challenge me. So I was always you give me a challenge or something that people didn't think I could do. I just had this really weird innate desire to do it. Mm-hmm. The male dominated part, I think it goes hand in hand with people telling you can't do it. No, you can't succeed in this. You don't belong here. You can't be as successful as these guys here. Yeah, I think I was I can. Yeah, I belong. They don't have to make space for me, and I don't need any of that. To have someone to coddle me, I'll make my own space, and I'll show everyone that I can do it. That's always been my attitude, I guess.
Yeah. So did a lot of people tell you that you couldn't?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everything. My whole life. But strangely enough, most people would say if your parents and your kid tells you they want to quit their job and go fish, or they want to go do this, my parents never once discouraged me in that, ever. Get a real job, make money, do this, do that. My parents never did that. If I put my head down and wanted to do something, I was going to be successful at it. Mm-hmm. No matter how bizarre it might be, I was going to be successful. And I think they always knew that.
She's driven, but she's grounded.
This is Jody Queen, a fellow kayak angler who helped Kristine in her first few years on the tournament trail.
That's everything in this sport. She's got a good grasp on who she is as a person, and you let things get to you in this sport, and especially her being a woman. I think she was prepared for the battle before she started it, But it didn't take long for everybody to figure out she was a real deal.
I've definitely, fishing, everybody fails, but I look at all that my big goals, and I've accomplished almost every single one of them now. With the exception of an Angler of the Year title, but I qualified for Hobie Worlds, which would have seemed impossible to me 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I won a Tournament of Champions. I've won several other national tournaments. Had a lot of success in that regard amongst all of the failures. So
yeah, and what do you see now that you've been doing it for a while? I'm sure you've seen anglers come and go. What is it about the guys that don't make it? And I'm sure it's a lot. It's really hard to be a professional kayak angler. But I guess what is it that you see that stops those folks from getting to where you are?
There's a lot of reasons, I think. I've had this conversation with a lot of my friends in the sport of kayak fishing. One, it takes an unprecedented amount of hard work to be a full-time professional angler. And what a lot of people don't realize is you have to be willing to adapt with that landscape. And what that means is when we first started off, and even in the competitive bass fishing world, all it took was being really, really good at fishing tournaments, right? To get sponsors. That's all people cared about. You won a Bassmaster Classic, you were getting sponsors. You were Kevin Van Dam, you're getting sponsors. Well, now, this is in the last 5 years, a lot of those companies that want to partner with you want some sort of a social media presence. They want exposure. They care more about that than tournaments. And I don't like that either. I'm a very old school way of thinking, and I'm definitely not a fan of how that landscape has changed. However, I'm also, like I said, I'm going to adapt and I'm going to survive, and I'm going to do what I've got to do to change with that so I can continue to do what I love. And that meant investing more into social media. It meant being very well-rounded. It meant trying to be diverse in what I do, writing, photography, doing good video work, doing seminars, whatever it may be. And I think a lot of the guys out there just aren't willing to really do what it takes. And it's a full-time job. A lot of people will tell you, like, you cannot be a professional kayak fisherman. You can't be a professional fisherman. And that right there is going to discourage 95% of people who want to follow their dreams, hearing all these voices and letting those voices in your head saying, nope, you can't do that. There's no freaking way you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do when you have a family or when you do this? And they're valid concerns, but it's like at some point you have to look at yourself and say, this is my dream and I want to make this work, I'm going to figure out a way to make that work.
Talk a little bit about like how obsessive, like, I guess you are, it's not a bad way, about fishing, and like why, and like what about it like really keeps you motivated?
Well, it is probably a bad thing in some regard, and that's okay. I've made peace with that. You know how I talked earlier how I had a hard time focusing and got bored fairly easy in school, distracted and just couldn't focus. And fishing is the one thing that I've found that has always kind of required all of my attention and my focus and has allowed me to really focus in on what's going on, because fishing is one thing that is always a challenge every single day. And it's so important for somebody like myself to just continuously be challenged. I mean, I'm motivated by a challenge, and that is fishing. I mean, you can't ever really truly predict or master it. It's always going to keep you on its toes. It's changing conditions. It's predicting Mother Nature and the fish and having different ecosystems and fisheries, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's a science. It's putting the puzzle pieces together, and that is how I think it really started. The obsession is just truly figuring out, everything that's going on, and not only that, it also connects you to nature, and that's like a double whammy right there for somebody like me. I get to be out on the water and doing what I love, and it's challenging. So I'm mentally, physically, and emotionally stimulated and at all times, which is pretty important to me.
It has to like drive it. I guess it just has to be like always a driving force to learn as much about the fish as possible, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's the thing that's so remarkable about fishing is you can't ever stop learning. There's so much more to learn about the sport, even when you've been in it as long as I have, or somebody else that's been in it for 50 or 60 years has. You can't ever stop learning. And that's the thing that's really remarkable about it. Like I said, it's limitless. And it changes all the time. So even when you get really, really, really good at something and then something else, comes out, or you've got to learn, and it's always evolving. I guess being obsessed with it means that I'm very focused on everything in my surroundings and very present in that moment. And it's helped me pay attention to what's going on, whether it be a wind change or bait flickering a certain area or brim popping under a certain mat. I mean, just those little subtle nuances on the water that helps key you in onto what's going on under the water. Like maybe just like give me an example of a time where like you knew what bait to throw and like what kind of cast you had to make, and like knew that there would be like, a big fish that would take it. Yeah. Gosh, I mean, it happens all the time. So like, I'll just think of a recent example. Gunnersville, fished on Gunnersville. It was a, kind of a post-spawn deal. And I knew that some of these little, some of the main river grass, as soon as if they're pulling current on the main river, the fish that are along that are moving out from the little bays and main lake pockets out to that main lake grass are going to be, the post-spawn fish are there and be feeding like absolute crazy. Mm-hmm. But it's a current driven thing. And if you didn't know that, and, you showed up on Saturday and you didn't know that was kind of how that bite worked, I mean, you're not going to catch as many fish. Are your tournament days like very different from how you just like fish every day? Yes. Okay. Very much so. Okay. Very much so. When I'm going out fun fishing, a lot of times I am going out and looking for a big bite, trying to work on a certain skill, or just go out and fish a technique that I really, really love. And I'm looking for big fish. When I'm fishing for a tournament, getting ready to, believe it or not, there's really not a lot of fishing that happens. It's more kind of scouting, looking for a certain water that I like, looking for the right habitat, looking and just kind of covering a lot of water, making a few casts here or there, but mostly trying to figure out where winning fish are, and then trying to expand on the area, finding enough diversity and knowing it intimately. And then for a tournament, you know, you're really, especially all mine are usually multi-day tournaments. You're not going out there to catch as many fish as you can on the first day because you need to manage those fish. So yeah. It's literally, it's home. I mean, practice is homework. It's not really fishing. It's literally like your job. It's homework. But it's stuff that it's homework I actually am interested in, which is the first time I can ever say that in my life. And then the tournament, it's like, you're literally giving everything you have mentally for the 8 hours during the tournament, and you're managing fish, and then you're going to kind of build on what you have or try to break down new water. And when I'm going out to fun fish, I mean, I like to be challenged, but I also just like to go and just, you know, if I know there's a good bite, flipping reeds, I want to go flip reeds for a few hours for a real big bite, you know, because I enjoy doing that a lot. Mm-hmm. I still get pretty intense sometimes, even just recreationally fishing and love to catch them, but it's definitely more laid back.
In that vein, like, what's it like catching a big fish during a tournament?
Well, I think you watch my YouTube videos. It's like a freaking, like a whole group of high school girls at a pop concert. It's pretty ridiculous. I get really animated and excited because it's like, man, you hook into a big fish in a tournament. It's just, but I'm like that. When it's not a tournament too, I look into a big fish, I get excited. I love that. It's like all hell breaks loose and it's chaos ensues, and it's just I love it. And I think that's why I still want to fish every single day, because I get genuinely excited when I hook into a good fish, you know, especially when you make a really good cast and you get bit, or you have this amazing top water eat or something, and you're in a tournament and you know you're one bite away and you finally get that kicker. It's a total rush. It really is. That's like an ultimate high, and the highest highs for a tournament angler is hooking into a big fish during a tournament.
So do you have like any perspective yet on how, like, where you are now? I mean, did you ever think about that?
No, I don't even like to think about that. It's still weird for me to even, I guess where I am. Yeah, it's really strange. There's this lady that, I don't even know, it's on our small town board, and they built a dock at the lakes I used to fish in our small town, and she wants me to dedicate the dock. I'm like, why me? Really, really strange for me still. And I guess I feel like I'm not curing cancer or saving lives. Well, maybe I'm helping people maybe find a little more joy by spending time outdoors, but, in terms of, like, I don't look at myself as being this big figure in the sport. I just don't. And I probably never will, to be totally honest with you. I'm happy to be a part of this sport and be at the, probably at the forefront, helping it grow and getting more women involved in it.
I think her movement for women in general too, like for me, it was demystifying capsizing in a kayak. For her, it might be demystifying the role of women in the outdoors. Kayak fishing for women is she's probably one of the major, if not the major proponent for getting women out there in kayaks.
I guess in terms of making a transition and making a full-time living and making a decent living fishing, it's still just kind of like, I sit back sometimes and put my feet up. I'm like, my goodness, I did it. I did make it work.
Are you the only female on the kayak tours?
I used to be, but now there's a handful of them on the national level kayak tours, which is amazing. I used to pretty much be the only one. Every once in a while, I'd run into one or two others, but I was mostly it. And now, like I said, there's a handful of them at every single tournament, which is incredible. And granted, our tours bring, anywhere from 150 to 200 people per event, and there's maybe 3 to 5 women.
And how old are you now, Kristine?
34, I think.
So you kind of started, you kind of went out on your own at 29.
Yes, 29 going on 30. Okay. That's when I started really doing that. Yep. So about, we were supposed to have our life figured out at 21, 22, 23. That took me about 10 years after that. But
oh, big fish. Big fish. Holy crap. I was just getting ready to leave. That was crazy.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited and produced by Senior Deputy Editor Natalie Krebs. Today's episode was hosted by me, Senior Editor Joe Genzel. Music for this episode is by Simon Brown via APM Music.